Here we go. It's a DC Sports Huddle. I'm Dave Johnson. We are sponsored, of course, by MGM National Harbor. Time to change the game at BetMGM Sports, along with Rob Woodfork, Dave Preston, and George Wallace. And yes, this week we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Washington football team's last Super Bowl victory. At the time, it was their third win in 10 years in the Super Bowl. It was January 26, 1992. The 91 season turned out to be simply a magical year, producing one of the best teams of all time, a 14-2 record. And let me tell you, I'll start with, we didn't think that was going to happen in the summer in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, when the quarterback, who turned out to be the MVP, had a 23-day holdout for a new contract. Didn't see it coming to this degree, where they just steamrolled through the entire NFL and ended up winning it all. We'll start with you, George Wallace. Your thoughts on that team, where it stands in terms of history, in terms of emotion with you, the Washington football team, our last Super Bowl champion in 1992.
Yeah, it's just some of the numbers that you look at what that team was able to do. Shut out opponents. First three games at home were shutouts. Ripken was sacked only 7 times all year, led the league in scoring, second in defense. I mean, just the in and out game after game to start out 11-0. Then you get behind at the Giants on that Sunday night. They lost 6 straight to the Giants, behind 13-0. Gary Clark drops 2 touchdown passes, would have been touchdowns. They come back to win. The Oilers at RFK, and Halfield misses a field goal that would chip shot that would have ended the perfect season, and they end up winning in overtime. I mean, and just to hear the stories from the players that year about how they wanted to win for Joe Gibbs. You wanted to win for your teammates. It was a veteran group. They were a tight-knit group. And they all kind of got the feeling that this was going to be maybe their last chance at it, last go round at it. And whoa, were they right? But they wanted to get it done, and they did just that. I mean, it starts from the Steve Buckhantz telling Joe Gibbs that Playboy picked him to win the Super Bowl, and Gibbs goes nuts. To Jack Kent Cooke calling him a bloody idiot, telling Gibbs he's messed up the team royally. To Ripken the year before, choking that game away in San Francisco in the divisional playoff, and then holding out. I mean, we thought the nerve of this guy to hold out after a performance like that. I mean, every button that they pushed all year long was a lot of fun. I mean, I was in 9th grade. If you want to talk personally, I was in 9th grade. I was a freshman in high school. I worked at RFK at Section 538 concession stand. My dad was running concession stand week in and week out, especially that year was just a lot of fun, especially as a diehard fan at that time, to be able to be at every home game and witness it like that. I mean, now you talk about, so many people wanted to be my friend that year at school, like wanted to be, get a job and work there. But, to the playoff run with the seat cushion game and then the championship game, just a magical run. I mean, it's just one of those things you're going to look back on. You never thought that would be the end because you're living it at the time. And then one of the cuts that Dave had pulled of Joe Gibbs for this morning on TOP, when he said, we all wanted to give it one last shot because you never know if this is going to be the last time. And, we had a feeling this could be the last time. I mean, he knew something we all didn't know maybe, but that was it. But yeah, no, it was a great magical run being around here. And, as you guys all know, I mean, everything, and Dave, been around here as longer, everything shut down during that time. Sundays, Mondays were miserable when this team lost, and it was everything that year kind of culminated with that day 30 years ago today. And it was just a lot of fun.
Well, as I'm about to celebrate my 95th birthday, I was on the air.
I didn't say you were that old.
1992 in WTOP, but just to put in context, the bloody idiot story, if you will, Jack Kent Cooke. As I covered training camp at the time in Carlisle, Dickinson College, a highlight was always of training camp. Mr. Cook, as Joe Gibbs always referred to him, Mr. Cook's visit to training camp. And during this time, Mark Ripken was holding out for a new contract. And Jack Kent Cooke said he'd be a bloody idiot if he doesn't report to camp soon. And he ended a 23-day training camp. But it was, I can't do a Jack Kent Cooke impersonation. The Steve Buckhantz story, now I forget whether it was from that preseason. It was after a preseason loss.
Yeah,
and Steve Buckhantz, our good friend at the time, was anchoring with Fox 5, asked Joe Gibbs, and some people are predicting you to be pretty good this season. And Gibbs was not happy with the loss, and he was like, who? And Buckhantz goes, well, Playboy magazine. And Joe Gibbs, Playboy magazine, and the reaction was just priceless. But yeah, we had Bloody Idiots, Playboy magazine, and an eventual Super Bowl team. So it was
and then Cook, Mr. Cook, told Gibbs that he had royally screwed up this team. And he says, you don't have the right players. That guy, Jimmy Johnson in Dallas, has all the right players. And Gibbs just went absolutely crazy at that point. And it was just, to think about hearing those kind of stories from the preseason and then to see what transpired in the next 3 months, kind of crazy.
Dave Preston?
Well, I was not living in the area at this time. I was a senior in college, and two of my best friends were big Bills fans, and they were very obnoxious, win, lose, tie, or in the off season. And I remember going, and that Bills team had so much talent too. Jim Kelly, Hall of Fame, Thurman Thomas in the Hall of Fame. I believe James Lofton, Andre Reed also in the Hall of Fame, Bruce Smith in the Hall of Fame. Of course, he set the sack record while in Washington, and we do have to remember points to prove it. But I was just thinking, oh my goodness, the Bills are going to win. They learned their lesson from last year, losing to the Giants on a last-second field goal. The only thing I was okay with was, okay, I'm a second semester senior. I only have a couple months to deal with their complete obnoxiousness. Sat down, watched the game, and I was amazed at how well prepared Washington was on both sides of the ball. We talk early and often this season about the whole being better than the sum of its parts. The defense with Chase Young, how things never really kind of worked. And some years offensively, Kirk Cousins was put up great stats, but somehow they were empty calories. You didn't feel that with that Washington team. My roommate that year was a big Redskins fan, big Orioles fan. He was coming off the vibe of Cal Ripken winning the MVP, and Camden Yards was an awesome place to watch baseball. And the O's were on the up and up, and Washington was going to dominate. They wound up getting the Heisman Trophy winner that year. And just to see how well run an organization could be growing up an hour north of Boston when the Patriots were the league's #1 joke at the time, on and off the field, with Victor Kiam running the team into the ground. This was years before Parcells showed up, and they were going to move to St. Louis or Hartford or somewhere else. And when you lived there, you couldn't even get the games on TV because they never sold out. And hearing stories about how RFK, the seats, bounced. And I actually I saw a game where the seats did bounce, and it's something you couldn't believe until you actually saw and see it. And then moving to the area 10 years later and hearing about the days, truly Camelot, the stuff of legends with Arthur and Lancelot and Gibbs and three different quarterbacks, three different ball carriers, the offensive line, the Hogs, the feel of this area for that team when this was the only team in town, really, when you think about it. And amazing how that's 30 years ago. And lets you know that with the Nats, with the Caps these days, with Maryland men's and women's basketball nowadays, you really have to appreciate what you have, because you don't know. Things can turn on a dime, and all of a sudden you can be 30 years in the wilderness.
RFK State also is home field
that
advantage.
day, and they continue to lose.
Yeah. RFK State also home field advantage, not only because it rocked, but I did a football game once with Jerry Glanville. It was a Falcons coach back in 1991, and he is still mad to this day about this. He tells a story about Joe Gibbs overwatering the field at RFK Stadium, and they eventually, of course, ran over the Atlanta Falcons in the playoffs. But the Falcons team was all built on speed, and Jerry Glanville's assertion was that Joe Gibbs made the RFK field too soggy for his Atlanta Falcons. Rob Woodfork?
It was pouring. It was pouring that day it had nothing to do with Gibbs wearing the field. It was pouring in that game.
Well, and furthermore, even if he
Jerry
did,
Glanville's version.
Right, and even if he did, that's gamesmanship, and people would accuse you of cheating nowadays, as Dave Preston, the Patriots fan, can attest to. Here's the thing about that 91 team, and I've said this long before now, so this is not me, sort of just carrying on with the theme of the day. I think the 1991 team is one of the greatest of all time. And I think there is a case to be made that they are the greatest team in NFL history, because if you look at the competition, the NFC East was not the laughing stock that it is now. I mean, the Giants were the defending Super Bowl champions, and they swept them that year. The Dallas Cowboys, this was the year before they started that run of 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. the Philadelphia Eagles had what was the best defense in the league at that time, or at least, through that era. So you look at who they beat on the regular, you look at how they beat them. They won their games by an average of 16 points per game over the course of that season. And just like George mentioned, their first 3 home games were shutouts. They haven't pitched a shutout since then. It's the longest shutout drought in the league. But 3 shutouts in a year, 4 shutouts in a season is the record. And they were pretty close to that because they had one game in which they only gave up 6 points. I think there was another game where they only gave up single-digit scoring. So, this was a dominant defense, second in scoring defense. They were the top scoring offense in the league. Their special teams had Brian Mitchell, who quite frankly should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. All 3, and as a matter of fact, I linked to this in the piece on WTOP.com, remembering this 30-year anniversary. And I wish I would have put it more prominently in there, but footballoutsiders.com ranked this team the most well-rounded team in NFL history. So, and that's spanning 645 teams that they studied over the course of time. This is the greatest team of all time, in my opinion. You look at the fact, and I think that they would rank higher on a national scale if they had more star power. And that's what ultimately was the problem, or at least what people didn't pay attention to really outside of Washington, was the fact that Joe Gibbs didn't have a bunch of star players. So I think if you take that out of the equation, the pomp and circumstance, this is really one of the best teams to ever do it. And I think they're the best.
And I think it should point out is this is really before the salary cap era and that type of thing. And I think it's another reason why we may not ever see another team like the Washington football team of that 1991 season, because Joe Gibbs could get stars when he wanted Wilbur Marshall and wanted to pay more than any other team in the NFL at the time would pay for Wilbur Marshall. He could go to Mr. Cook and convince him of that. And he could assemble his roster without the restrictions of the salary cap. And that certainly was a benefit to Joe Gibbs and the Washington football team. And that team is a reminder that football is about the line of scrimmage. You look at what they did on the defensive side, but moreover, as George mentioned, Mark Rippon was able to operate without getting sacked because of the strength of the Hogs. And no disrespect to Mark Rippon, but he's not one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but it didn't matter. He had the time to do what he needed to do, and he ended up as a Super Bowl MVP.
Guys, I think there are 2 reasons why that team, as well as the other Washington championship teams in the Gibbs era, kind of slipped through the cracks as far as when people say, hey, the best teams of all time. 1, Joe Gibbs, great coach, but not a super promoter guy, not the big personality. I always felt that Bill Walsh, the late Bill Walsh, always wanted to tell you how smart he was as far as knowing the game. Bill Parcells was, had moxie as well. Even Buddy Ryan, not as good a head coach as the other guys. He had a certain personality that you kind of hooked into, that maybe you thought that the Eagles were better than they actually were, even though they had a fantastic defense, as Rob mentioned, and one of the generational quarterbacks, Randall Cunningham, at the time. I think another reason why people don't think of Washington as one of the greats, even though the 1991 edition was absolutely fantastic, not a lot of staying power. That was a team where you had, Mark Rippon, that was his only championship as a starter. The 87 team had 2 starting quarterbacks, neither of which threw for 3,000 yards for Washington thereafter. When you look at the great teams over time, you think, okay, Bart Starr, multiple championships with Green Bay, Roger Staubach, multiple titles with Dallas, Bradshaw, Montana, Brady, obviously, Peyton Manning. You had guys who were, who had great runs at their positions and championship runs over multiple years. I think it's a testament to what a great coach Joe Gibbs was with this team, and what a great front office Charlie Casserly and Bobby Beathard put together, was that you had multiple pieces winning over a decade. And that I think, Jerry Krause, the late Jerry Krause, called the Bulls an organizational triumph, when, we knew there was kind of a Michael Jordan triumph with an organization that helped him out. But I think you look at those championships, 82, 87, and 91, as great organizational triumphs. And when you again, fan bases, you're victims of who happens to own your team. And Jack Kent Cooke, for all of his squireness, for all of his marriages, for hanging out at Duke Zebert's all the time, he was a great owner. And the guys he put in place were great as well. And I think when you look of, will this Washington team, the Commanders or the Dipsy Kickers or whatever they're going to call themselves, B-Sharps, will they ever be good again? It starts from the top, and it starts with a great chain. And I think we've got a great example in what it takes to be a great organization in the 1991 Washington championship team.
Yeah, and well, Jack Kent Cooke just provided the most important thing, the financial support, and he really did stay
And the
out of
ascots.
When he visited Carlisle, it was more to play around with the reporters and have his presence. It was also all about who was in Jack Kent Cooke's suite. Then he wasn't trying to coach the football team from a suite. It was if you were a guest and you made the list and you got in Jack Kent Cooke's suite, that was a big deal at RFK Stadium. But again, the generational players that Art Monk and Darrell Green were on this team. That offensive line is the Mount Rushmore right there of an offensive line that they anchored the success of that franchise for a decade, basically.
The prime,
but
there's
also,
only one of them in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
Yeah,
right, and
that should be in the Hall
on that line.
No, and it's because I don't have an explanation for why that is, because that is the Hogs. It was more than, maybe it's because people thought it was just a nifty nickname and there wasn't substance behind it, but there was so much substance behind it and what they allowed this Washington football team to achieve. But then again, you talk about Charlie Castle. He's part of the story, and he's right here in our area. Brad Edwards is the athletic director at George Mason University. He was one of what they call the killer Plan B free agents. They don't even have Plan B free agency anymore, but he had 2 interceptions in that Super Bowl, and Darrell Green had 1 in that Super Bowl. So there's a George Mason connection to the success they had that day at the Metrodome. But it was a well-assembled team with an owner that said whatever Joe Gibbs needs, he gets. And what they ended up all getting was a Super Bowl trophy.
And you talk about the Plan B guys. You got the guys like Martin Mayhew, who's now GM of this team. You get Kirk Avey on defense, Danny Copeland, all those guys, Gary Clark, all those guys. And it's to Dave's point about the quarterbacks not being mainstays, but you had the core group, not only the Hogs, but you had Gary Clark, who won 2 Super Bowls. You know, some of those guys that were around for that good 5, 6, 7, 8 year chunk. And then in 91, you go get the Mark Schlereth, the Jim Lachey's, Matt Millen, who he was inactive, played a big role during the season, but inactive for the playoffs. Didn't care. Like, he's out there helping.
You wouldn't know from the video.
Right. So, but again, that goes to everybody doing their part. And it did not matter what your role was on that team. You knew what it was, and you were there as a member, as a part of the team. And nobody, they weren't flashy. They weren't, you see some of the videos during Super Bowl week, and these guys talking about how boring this Redskins team was. Well, we're just here. The Bills are great. We're here to compete. We're happy to be here. Very monotone. And you got the Bills out there talking about, calling these guys names and this and that. But that was, you took after Joe. They were taking after their head coach at that point. Very even, stay medium, as Jim Zorn once said. But that's how they, that's just kind of the way they were. They weren't flashy. They just went out and took care of business. So to your point, Rob, about why they're not talked about a lot as one of the greatest, because they're not flashy. They're not they weren't flash. They just went out and took care of business.
Well, and maybe it's no coincidence, but Washington's also never had a Super Bowl winner since a head coach stopped doing a daily show on WTOP. Joe Gibbs did a daily show on WTOP, and he would call it in. It would be, at the time we called it Master Control at WTOP. It would be Joe Gibbs to call it in, and this is Coach Gibbs with a report, and he would just talk, and it was a script that was written, I think, with the help of the public relations staff, but it was, and then he would just do it all in one take. And if he made mistakes, the engineer would edit it together. But it aired at 8:17, 1:17, and 5:17 every day.
We got to dig through the archives for that. I would love to hear something.
Yeah, so the Joe Gibbs report, and it was every day. And it was, but so while Joe Gibbs was not a self-promoter, he was a great person at connecting with the fans. And part of it was doing this every day. now he's compensated for it, obviously, but he did this every day. And Coach Gibbs here, and you just felt like you were a part of the team because he was telling you about, how they were arranging the meal table at training camp or whatever. And it was a priceless time.
And how fun has it been as we've gone through all of this old footage to commemorate this 30th anniversary? How fun is it to hear Joe Gibbs and to see guys like Charles Mann and Art Monk and Darryl Green, all these guys? I mean, we used to be so proud of this team. We used to be so.
You felt connected. You're connected to them.
I know.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like it's like a part of. I mean, for me, my childhood. I was in 6th grade when last they won the Super Bowl. So it's just for me. It's just like, oh, these are the voices and these are the names of my youth. And not only that association, but it's just like you were so proud of them, and people were jealous of you for being a fan of the team because they were so good. And it's just like it's something that we haven't felt here in so long. And I mean, like I said in the piece. If it's hard not to look back at this great championship run and not make it a referendum on where they are now, but I'm just trying to enjoy the memory of that season instead of sort of juxtapositioning it against what they are now.
Real quick, and I'm going to jump, but that you hear a lot of the guys talk about how close they felt with the fans, even at home games, and they wanted to win because they knew some of these, see this familiar faces. They knew how much it meant to this city when they won. These guys stuck around for a while. They felt a part of the city. Now it's completely different. And that's fine. You talk about the old days, that's fine. But to hear those guys talk about that, that's why you feel so connected to them.
And some of that.
Let's do it for the kid in section 538.
Hey, that's right. You want a hot dog, a beer, sauerkraut, anything you want, come see me.
Oh, it also takes me back.
But also that was a product of the times too. I mean, it was easier access, I think, back then. I mean, there's more access now in terms of social media and being able to interact with people. But I mean, genuine like in-person interactions were more realistic, I think, back then than they are now.
Yeah, no, it also takes me back to the time before cell phones were prevalent because in 91, by January of 92, I was doing mornings at WTOP, but back then we only had 2 sportscasters, half of this entire sports huddle. And the morning shift was 4 a.m. to 1 p.m. and the evening shift was 1 p.m. to 11 p.m. So it was kind of a lot of sports. So when I did the afternoons, you'd have to drive out to the park out there in Herndon at the time. And it was must to be out there on Monday. And I can always remember the challenge of trying to get back in to the station, and you couldn't just call in a report from your cell phone. You didn't have one, so you had to pull over. And I knew every hotel that I could pull into and unscrew a phone and put a voice act in and deliver my 6:45 sportscast because I didn't get it back to Idaho Avenue in time. But there we go. There's minutia that I just put the whole room asleep. But it was definitely a great time. All right, we've got Final Four weekend here for the NFL. We're getting closer. Greatest, wildest season ever, probably. It's bananas. All these games, or at least this weekend. And what a flip from the previous weekend where every game was a blowout. Who are you liking as we come down the stretch here, Dave Preston?
I'm liking San Francisco for some reason. They've got whatever reason they've got the Rams number, and I'm not confident in Jimmy Garoppolo, but they did the little things right against Green Bay. Proof that special teams. I mean, I say early and often on this huddle that the NFL is an offensive league. It's a quarterback league. You got to have a great quarterback. Special teams was the difference this past weekend with kicks at the end of regulation. Packers gave away 10 points with a blocked punt and a missed field goal. And then the squib by the Bills, the non-squib by the Bills cost them. I've got Kansas City beating Cincinnati in the AFC. And then I've got San Francisco beating the Los Angeles Rams in the NFC. That is the super awesome NFL playoff cup.
Rob Woodfork?
I do not have a cup to write all this on, but
I can make one for you.
No, I'm good. Thanks. The Kansas City Chiefs, I picked before the season to go back to the Super Bowl. So I'm going to stick with the girl I took to the dance here. And I don't say that to dismiss the Cincinnati Bengals in any way. I think they've been really, really good this year and their future is really bright. But I mean, we saw Patrick Mahomes and what he did in the divisional round. I mean, there was nothing humanly possible that Josh Allen could have done more to win that football game. But for some reason, Mahomes just happened. So I have a hard time seeing them lose that game. And, for a lot of the reason that Dave just said, the 49ers over the Rams, that one I'm a little more torn on. The Rams feel like this kind of team of destiny right now, but also the 49ers have beaten them 6 in a row. And we've seen throughout history where you face a division rival in the playoffs, the team that swept in the regular season has gone on to complete the 3-game sweep 14 out of 22 times so far. So I'm kind of giving the edge to the 49ers, even though I'm not super confident in it. And that's a really boring Super Bowl rematch, but here we are.
All right. Well, and it's funny you mentioned the 49ers because I'm just go with the 49ers over the Rams, even though so many factors should point to the Rams. Sometimes when you've lost 6 straight to a team, now it's going to be your time. But the 49ers seem like that team that they've got that certain factor that says, all right, go ahead, bet against us, and we're going to win anyway. And so I'm confident in the 49ers taking that game against the Rams, and it'll be the 49ers and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl because Joe Burrow can't get sacked 9 times every game and win. And I'm not saying that's going to happen against the Chiefs, but Patrick Mahomes, what he's doing, just keep following him because he's making everyone better.
And just to make it full circle here, the Burrow got sacked more times in that playoff game than the Washington offensive line allowed the entire 1991 season. Wrap your head around that.
Which, if you're paying close attention to the huddle, was 7 times, as George Wallace pointed out. All right, George, final 4 pick for this weekend.
All right. Well, thanks for having me back. I'm going to go. I'm going Patrick Mahomes. I mean, just what he was able to do last week. I mean, I think that they're at a new level right now, playing at another level. Bengals, great story, but I think it comes up short. And it is, I know you just touched on the 49ers. It's really tough to beat a team 3 times. I am going with the Rams. Who would have thought Odell Beckham Jr. would be the big key late season signing for this team? Rams, Chiefs, Super Bowl.
A lot of guys has been made of the fact that Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan used to be assistants in Washington. And somebody pointed out, and Matt LaFleur with Green Bay. So we said, we let these guys get away. It's like, or they could have coached here and have been ruined by incompetence and, jealousy and other front office shenanigans. So good luck.
Well,
good luck.
Audible at the line of scrimmage real quick. I don't know if anybody caught the Wizards the other night. It wasn't pretty what happened to them. Yeah. And what's inexplicable is still the same group of players that looked so great against the Philadelphia 76ers and at other times have looked so great. I think the bottom line for this team now, to me, and this is not to say that people are not trying, but there's a leadership void on the court, because what should have happened in that game against the Los Angeles Clippers, okay, every team's going to make a run, but somewhere there wasn't that player that moment to say, all right, guys, that's it. Let's cut it out and step on this team's neck and get them out of here. And instead, the Clippers kept coming back from a 35-point deficit and winning. And maybe that's a part of a collection of guys that really haven't played together, even though it's 40-some games. And all right, who's the lead dog? Who's gonna take charge here? But it's long overdue. Whether it's Bradley Beal, whoever it is, somebody has to take charge on the court. And you feel like, all right, this guy is going to be our leader, and he is definitely making it happen on the court. I'm not talking about face of the franchise or who the most popular player is. You need
a Trevor Ariza, like a guy like a Trevor Ariza, or a Paul Pierce, Caron Butler, a Paul Pierce, or somebody. You need that personality. That's how. I have no problem with the Clippers cutting a lead from 35 to 15. That happens in NBA games. It just never obviously happens to the degree it happened, because somewhere there was not the player to put his foot down and really impose his will on not only the other team, but the rest of his teammates, and say, all right, guys, puff out our chest.
this team is not as good as we are, and we're going to show them right now. And that didn't
also
happen.
they were making just really dumb mistakes down the
Yeah.
stretch. I mean, fouling on
Fundamental.
that 3-pointer at the end, the 5-second violation. I mean, it was just sloppy and just unfocused, and it's super disappointing because, I mean, Davis said it a million times. I mean, Wes Unseld Jr. is that dude. I mean, I don't have a problem with him coaching,
Well, and
there may be a depth that you know, maybe he needs to do a little different with the lineups so that you can take advantage of all this. Because just last week we were talking about how deep they are. Well,
Yeah.
you know, it's about playing the right guys at the right time, and you know, maybe there could have been some adjustments on that end.
Yeah, no, well, but you have those late game mistakes because you didn't put the fire out in the third quarter.
Right.
Because then by the fourth quarter, because this is still going on, now everybody's got deer in headlights,
Everybody's panicking,
especially
yeah.
the fans.
But
Any
Dave,
other
isn't
audibles?
is it concerning that at this point, I'm just asking, is it concerning at this point that Beal's not that guy? At a game like
you
that?
know, I don't want to put it all on Beal, but it's concerning that it's concerning that, yeah, somebody needs to be that guy.
Yeah.
On a consistent basis. And yeah, I guess it is concerning that Beal, because he's been the guy here on our street for the longest time, and you expect him to kind of impose his will on his own team at a critical moment.
But also the leader of the team and the heart and soul of the team is not always the best player, which is
Right.
pretty
No, that's
disappointing.
fine.
Yeah, which is kind of disappointing because we always want to make you know, sort of the face of the franchise or the, you know, best player, that guy. But you know, I mean, I think he does need because I think when John Wall was here, John Wall was that guy. So I mean, they need somebody who can sort of take that heat off of Beal and just let him go out and ball.
Yep. Any other audibles at the line of scrimmage?
I'm going to audible at the line of scrimmage, talk a little college basketball. Maryland getting off the Big Ten mat over the last couple of games. Georgetown staying on the Big East mat. It's
they're under the mat.
It's a tough season for the Hoyas. I think 3 of their next 4 games are against schools in the conference with losing records. They need to win 2 or 3 of those games because their schedule is backloaded. They play Villanova again. They play Marquette again, who ran roughshod over them. Providence again as well. So it could, the season's already bad for Georgetown. They've never started 0-6 in the history of the Big East. And this is a franchise that was a flagship school of this conference since its inception. It's a historically bad year for Patrick Ewing and company. But there's always something exciting to talk about in the area. I'm going to look to Saturday, VCU Richmond, the best local sports rivalry if you want to extend our net all the way down to the capital city in the Commonwealth. They play Saturday. Both are fighting for A10 relevance. That's going to be a game that I'm going to look forward to watching this Saturday, guys.
Also, real quick on the Hoyas, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I say this with all respect due to John Thompson. His era was what, 30, 40 years ago now? At this point, it's time to stop hiring guys who had ties to John Thompson and just find the person who's the best for the job. Again, I don't think Patrick Ewing is necessarily the problem at Georgetown, but you know, if there's a better direction to go, you don't just go in the best direction that John Thompson directs you. You go in the best direction for the program moving forward and sort of moving on from that era.
How about let's go ahead. I was going to
go ahead.
I'll give a shout out to the let's give a shout out to the Sidwell Friends girls basketball team. Number 1 in the nation.
You got it.
Being a team from Texas last weekend. That's a pretty cool story.
Right.
Yes, it is.
Right. Very cool. Well, we'll hear it for Sidwell Friends. Rob brings us full circle as he was talking about. Don't go back to ties from 30 to 40 years ago. We started 30 to 40 years ago. The Washington football team.
And Dave's
please check
95th
out-
birthday.
Hey, do you want?
And you said your 95th birthday. So yeah.
And my 95th birthday is coming up. So please send me some new false teeth. Anyway, Rob Woodfork, a wonderful gallery on the Washington football team.
Yeah.
You're going to want to check that out. All the videos, some audio there, a much younger Dave Johnson recap of the season with the legendary WTOP anchor, Jamie Bragg, who was so special to our station. And I remember that morning so well in January of 1992.
And how about Dave still sounding the same as he did in 1991? I mean, I was like,
Yeah.
why is his audio so bad? Oh, wait a minute. This is from 1991. And
Yeah.
Deborah Feinstein, our colleague, sounded so.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
man, it was a different time back then. I mean, it was a different format almost.
We were News Radio 15
Yeah.
back then.
Oh,
All
wow.
right. There'll be a history test next week. We thank you for joining us on the DC Sports Huddle, sponsored by MGM National Harbor. It's time to change the game at BetMGM Sports. For Rob Woodfork, Dave Preston, George Wallace, I'm Dave Johnson. Thanks for going down memory lane with us and being part of the DC Sports Huddle.
Break.
Break.